podcast listeners. This is yet another episode of Health Sciences Today. I am Professor Raywat Deonandan, and I'm back once again with Stephen Kutcher, who is no longer a doctoral student. He is now a full-fledged doctor or PhD. In fact,
Fake doctor.
wow, aren't we all? Aren't we all? We haven't done one of these since 2019, and traditionally we do an episode just before an election. That wasn't the original plan. That's kind of how it's turned out. The last election we did one for was 2019, and since then a number of things have happened. Stephen got his doctorate and has squeezed out two children. In fact, he's a brand new dad again, so he's going to be a little addle-brained and not entirely with us, but he'll do our best.
I won't remember this conversation.
Excellent. So we're going to talk about the election platforms, the party platforms, with this particular focus on healthcare and health research. If people don't know, the Canadian federal election is tomorrow. So we're getting this just under the wire. Is anyone going to listen to this? Yeah, I think people are going to listen to this, and this is going to decide the future of our nation. So
We're going to change minds tonight.
yeah, we're going to melt some minds also. So because we're both overworked, um, we don't know a whole lot what's going on. But if Steve, if you don't mind, I'll give my take on what the two platforms are, and you can give your take, and we can just dissect them as they go. So my take on the Liberal platform, and by the way, people listening, if you're not Canadian, why are you listening? The Canadian election is dominated by two major parties, the Liberals, who are currently in government, and the Conservatives, who are their main opposition. So the Liberal platform on healthcare, I think, is bold. It's promising expanded pharmacare, expanded dental care, somewhat of an innovation in the healthcare system, but it might be over-promising without provincial buy-in, because a lot of this requires the provinces to accede to the plans. They've got a workforce strategy that focuses on training and licensing, but we'll get more into this. I don't think it really focuses on the true issues that affect retaining doctors and nurses in our country. On the health research side, I think they've got a pretty robust plan to attract and retain some high level um, health researchers. It's a broad vision, but I don't know if the roadmap is there. The Conservatives, on the other hand, I think have a fairly cautious health platform. So they're going to maintain the pharmacare and dental plans, but not expand them. And their plan for healthcare worker expansion focuses on credentials. So they've got this idea for a blue seal program for making the recognition of healthcare credentials universal across the country using a blue seal, which is a take on the red seal program used in the trades. And they don't seem to have a health research platform that I can see. I do like their plan, though, for attracting and retaining more healthcare workers. So they're pretty robust on that front. So that's the way I see it as a summary. Do you have any upfront takes, Stephen?
Well, you've covered a lot of what they mentioned, and the one thing that you think you just mentioned there that I thought was interesting with this blue seal credentialing, this idea of some sort of national coverage, which, as if those listeners are not fully aware, and sometimes our federal parties don't always make this clear and distinguishable, I don't think, is that a lot of our public healthcare system is managed by those provinces and territories, and the federal government just funds the majority of it, or a lot of it. And that is something where if you're in, let's say, Ontario or Quebec, they have completely different credentialing systems. And in that case, this national credentialing system is quite interesting to me. I don't know the history of how many times if this has been attempted in the past, but I think it's a wonderful idea to put in place.
Yeah, I'm pretty impressed. I'm pretty impressed by the Conservative plan for that. I mean, they got the Blue Seal program. They have an accelerated credential recognition plan. They want to expedite the approval of credentials for immigrants, which
Yeah.
I've been advocating for a long time.
Right.
And
And they also mentioned something about those who I think are already in country. Is that correct? So it's not even about new immigrants, it's about
Right,
existing
exactly.
immigrants.
Yeah, ones who are currently driving taxis and things like that. And
Because there is a strong, message I think within the conservative platform in limiting new immigration right now
right.
is a thing they want to really strongly tie into some other metrics. Not sure how they do it, but it's
Yeah,
something that they want to do.
that's a really good point. So, on the one hand, you want to limit new immigration. On the other hand, they want to maximize what you get out of the current newcomer population. I think that's good. I do think, though, they're missing the opportunity here to maximize the potential good from newcomers. I will add,
Especially in that political climate that we'll try not get too deep into today.
right, exactly. Yeah, just focusing on the platforms themselves and the realism. I think it's a good idea to want to accelerate the credentials of immigrants. And they've also got financial support for the certification of those immigrants because the financial burden is a barrier to these individuals getting certification.
So while we're on this topic, maybe
Yeah.
let's talk a bit more, and maybe you have a better take on this than I do, because I'm not as familiar with how this credentialing system at a national level will succeed. How would you get buy-in for something like this?
This is, you know what, I was going to say this. I don't know if there actually is a federal role for this. This strikes me as something that is entirely provincial and maybe even um, driven by the licensing bodies within each province, which are notoriously Byzantine, if not
Hmm.
secluded. So there's a lot of chest thumping here at a federal level that I don't think translates to actual action at the local level. And what we have here is something of a civics crisis where a lot of voters don't really understand the separation of powers between the federal level and the provincial level. Maybe I don't either. Maybe I'm wrong about this. I don't fully buy into the idea that a federal government can increase residency spots with the stroke of a pen.
I don't know if they could. And the one thing I don't remember which party. I think it was partly NDP, and I think the CPC had a mention of it too. I didn't see it in the LPC. And again, I say this with father brain, and I didn't have as much time to find all this, but they were trying to suggest ways of incentivizing them with federal funding, is that they can provide either tax breaks to individuals, or they can provide, as tax breaks are usually the CPC sort of approach to things, where the NDP was thinking of providing funding up to a certain amount to, such as attract family medicine.
Yeah, that would be probably the best way to do it with your financial levers. And I don't know how to do otherwise. So the liberals are also saying they want to expand training opportunities, just increase more spots in medical schools. I think that's just writing a check to medical schools saying, hey, open more spots. But that's kind of pointless unless you also marry that with residency opportunities. And like a
And
lot of citizens don't get that.
and residency training that retains those people in the locations. I know the northern and the isolated kind of non-big city locations are having difficulty
Right.
keeping, professional healthcare providers in their locations.
Exactly. And both parties have identified workforce mobility as an issue, but at least the conservatives have this concrete plan of, blue seal, whatever that is. At least it's something.
An
Liberals,
idea, yeah.
yeah, exactly. The liberals have added a $4 billion infrastructure investment plan, and that's for renovating the clinics and things like that. I'm assuming to make it more attractive for clinicians to work in there. Here's my issue for both parties is they don't really address the real reason, well, one of the top reasons rather, that there's a crisis in family doctor availability. And as you know, people might realize my spouse is a family doctor and she complains to me about this all the time. it's it's just the workload, and the workload has a little bit to do with not enough doctors, but a lot to do with not enough administrative support. There's a lot of demands on them. The government keeps pumping more and more work for them to do with less and less remuneration. And there needs to be support. The burnout is quite extraordinary, and neither party has put forth a solution for burnout. And that to me has to be addressed.
So let's if we can, take a tiny, adjacent pause from the platforms. When it comes to this burnout, which I've heard with a few groups that I've worked with, um, this role of AI that I didn't really see mentioned in either platform related to healthcare. I saw it mentioned a few times in certain places, but related to healthcare, it's a big thing. and how that can play a role in retaining. And I'm surprised that it wasn't kind of mentioned.
Yeah.
Not the sense not to say I'm fully on board with using IA to solve and replace things, but for this idea of lessening burden, is there a role for that, do you think, here of mitigating some of these risks and
I
stresses of these
That's a
family
good
MDs?
question. I know a lot of physicians use a variety of AI tools for note taking, for managing rosters, and so forth, and it's quite powerful on that end. If you're suggesting it can be used for triage or for actually addressing some low level medical issues like psychotherapy and radiology and things like that, that has not been overtly stated yet. I do suspect that that's in the back of the minds of these parties if they were to obtain power. But again, that's mostly a provincial matter.
True.
And the role of the federal government will be to perhaps guide and direct monies towards that end goal. I will say, though, that the Liberals have included overtly a digital health and innovation package or section. I'm not sure what that means, but they're going to launch a task force for public health care innovation around digital health. And digital health might include artificial intelligence. And I'd be surprised if it doesn't,
And
actually.
and apologies to our six listeners. A lot of these platforms are going to be extremely vague because of this exact civic disconnect that we always
Exactly
run
right.
into here. Um,
We're going to have a lot more than six listeners this time around.
but it always challenging to read these platforms and even promise anything tangible because of this division. You can offer
Right.
money, but you can't top down force provinces to do anything in the current division of powers and structure. I think the healthcare specific, like the urgent care setting that is in
Yeah.
place.
It's provincial. Absolutely. The best you can do is give them money. But even if you give them money, by them, I mean the best the federal government could do is give the provinces money. How do you ensure the money will be spent on the thing that you says it must be spent on? That requires additional policy. And again, neither party has put forth a whip of some kind to enforce that reality.
Has there been a recent example, do you
The
remember, of
COVID.
removing
Oh,
money
removing? Not that I can
to
think of.
punish a province? I can't think of anything either. I remember talks of it, but I've never
Yeah.
seen it done.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's uh, some allowance of that in the Canada Health Act, if but it's rarely applied, as far as I know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to extend my expertise in that area. But the crux of the matter for me is the strong differentiating principle between the two parties is, of course, one is more fiscally restraintive and the other is more, fiscally spending. So the liberals seem more eager to spend and the conservatives seem more eager not to spend, which is in line with their ideologies. The question is, what is most appropriate for the current economic and political climate? I'm not going to say. That's for the voters to decide. I will say I'm disappointed in the conservative platform for not having more on healthcare research. And the liberals have a specific plan for uh, attracting and retaining top talent. And I think that is driven by the exodus of American talent. And I want to say that this talent, that their platform includes some things that I wrote about in an article. They probably had their platform out before my articles came out, but they do mention expanding the Canada Research Chair program for this purpose, which is one of my recommendations. So at least they've got. What I like about this is that they're using existing programs um, to lever to gain traction in the current crisis.
They're not reinventing a wheel.
They're not
They're
inventing something new, exactly. Just throwing more money at existing program and inflating it. And some might call that uncreative, which it is. Others might call it more practical, which is
But but also when you think of a government, which is usually pretty slow in their turning of generating a new idea, the current political climate that needs this type of incentive can't take time to come into place and activate and be useful. So I understand the time-sensitive nature of potentially leveraging this system quickly and just pumping new money into an existing, you know, cycle of structures.
Yeah.
rather than build a new one, which again, I can't imagine how long it would actually take to develop a new program.
Here's the
Um,
problem, though, is so reading the details here, the Liberal platform seeks to add 1,000 new Canada Research shares. And if people don't know, the Canada Research shares are meant to attract and retain the best scientists in the world. The way that they are allotted to universities is depending upon that university's history of getting funding, they can propose X number of Canada Research shares. So the distribution of these shares across the country is going to be a little bit problematic, especially since if you're trying to catch the American refugees like salmon swimming up the funding pipeline, they may not want to go to some universities and go to others. So it's unclear exactly if they're sticking to the old-fashioned way of allotting the shares.
so what you're mentioning here is that there's not enough potential flexibility
Right.
in
That's the word.
when those attractees or those those research chairs that are trying to attract, they can't go to wherever they want. They have to go to wherever they are existing.
Yeah.
And I assume a lot of them are existing in major university centers,
Yeah.
but there are definitely probably some in less, desirable locations, if I can use that word,
Right.
um, not in the middle of nowhere, which unfortunately is not going to attract international talent immediately.
Yeah, I mean, let's say it bluntly, most are going to want to go to Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. And it would be nice if we can convince them to go other places, but those are the desired destinations first up. In addition, the Liberal plan is calling for a $75 million annual fund to help universities commercialize their research. I don't think that's a lot of money. I don't think it's enough money.
To you or me individually, it sounds like a lot, but
Sure.
to do a national fund, is this supposed to be a national level, right?
Yeah, and I don't know how it's going to be distributed across universities either, so it may not be sufficient. Um, but it's something. I think it's performative and demonstrative, but who knows?
It's kind of like the NDP plan, essentially.
I didn't even look at the NDP plan. I didn't bother.
I perused it, but it's as I think because as you mentioned at the start, they're never really threatening. I think promise pie in the sky
Yeah,
more often than not, and they're kind of in the position to do that. They don't have to back up a lot of their um, ideas in the same substantive way of an actual governing party would have to.
right. Because realistically, no one expects them to form the government this time around. However, to give them their due, if they are the power brokers in the event of a minority government, then they can push forward those elements of their platform that they want to be expressed.
And in that defense of the NDP, they do have a couple. For example, they do want to expand their pharmacare and
Yeah,
their dental and their mental health. So there are some things I think that they can do, but a large proportion of their platform is just offer up money. And I don't know how much money. I didn't look at their costed
mhm,
version of their platform.
yeah.
I can imagine it was quite indebted.
I mean, at least they're honest.
All of them
The,
are, though.
they
Let's be
all are,
honest, they all are.
but at least they're honest, saying best we can do is give money, which is what they all can do. Also,
Yeah, especially when it comes to health.
right? Yeah, the pharmacare and dental care is interesting. I think we'll agree that more of that would benefit more Canadians. On the other hand, more of that is more expensive, and one could argue that it should be downloaded onto private sector if you've got that kind of care. So it should be reserved for people who possibly don't have private care. One could argue. I'll leave that for the voters to decide for themselves. But it's curious that the distinguishing quality between the Liberals and the Conservatives is that they both want to maintain the existing packages, but the Liberals want to extend pharmacare to things like diabetes drugs and extend dental care beyond just senior citizens, but to all adults. So one is spending more money, and one wants to spend less. That's what it comes down to. I
And you have to give credit to the conservatives here because oftentimes they try and cut, but they recognize it seems like a popular program,
right.
and they've said they're going to keep it. Whether or not they would, who knows? They can
If
make
they're, if they're,
promises.
yeah, I don't think they would cut it. I mean, it's far too popular.
I think so. I think you're correct.
Now the $10 daycare, that's another story. They may cut that, but that's
It's
not a
not
healthcare
directly
issue.
health, but you could argue it is.
It's a
We've
determinant of health.
we can go down that road if we want to, and talk about housing and how that plays into health, etc. But I think we're trying our best to stay within
Yeah,
the silo of healthcare,
things we actually know about.
which is nothing.
Yeah, it's hard to have this conversation without expressing our individual opinions on which party we prefer, even though it's probably obvious. But I think it's fair to say they both have some pretty good ideas, and they both have some pretty underdeveloped ideas.
And I've said I say this as someone who's I think always voted for different parties constantly, where I
Mm.
don't have a specific tie. And I walked in to vote this year, and I still didn't know which person I was voting for.
Hmm.
Um, I kind of like things from each of them, and I think
Yeah,
it's always drawn me a bit further as I've gotten older to this minority style government and allowing more parties to kind of provide ideas, and hopefully they can come and build in more ideas together. And
right.
I don't think we live in a world right now where that's a really strong idea, especially not in North America. There's definitely more uh,
I think,
mosaic parties in the Europe, for example, but
yeah.
it doesn't really happen successfully very often here.
Well, who knows what'll happen in the coming years, right? The pendulum does swing, so one can only hope. I will add though for the six listeners that we have that
Down to five now.
we're only talking about healthcare and health research in this podcast. People will be upset with us. We didn't talk about values and their actions on this front. It's true. That's true. There are many other reasons to choose one party over the other. Absolutely. But we're being quite fair in our dissection of specifically the health platform.
You can be a one issue voter that has nothing to do with healthcare. And
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well stated. Well, I think we've covered everything that needs to be covered here.
the one thing I thought I wanted to mention that I thought was interesting is I think there's a focus on largely on the liberal platform that I thought was interesting how it kind of showed up a bit in, as you've mentioned a tiny bit about their spending plan, and it was their focus on infrastructure because they had this strong push about spending for kind of capital gains, right? This idea of spending that you get returns on. And I think a big thing that always people looked at, I think Harper did it in the crisis, was infrastructure spending.
Mhm.
Build an infrastructure because you get good return on that type of investment. I think that was a big part that I saw that stood out to their plan.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I don't know if that's going to appeal to a voter. I'm not saying it's a good political approach, but I thought it was an interesting idea that they had, that it was a lot of focus on the infrastructure side under the very current problem that we are having as a whole, dealing with certain political climates that happen south of the border.
Yeah, infrastructure is an odd one because it can be spun to be pork barrel. Like we're
Hmm.
going to spend the money on our friends only or on these jurisdictions. And it often is that way. And even if it isn't meant to be that way, it turns out to be that way because you're going to spend it on certain industries. And if you do, it's going to be in certain tiers within those industries. Um, but yeah, infrastructure investment is a big part of this. And I wonder though if it's also tied with the need for economic stimulus, you know, spend more to acquire growth. Either way, it's there. Uh, Adding debt to our nation, but maybe in a positive way. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an economist. I'm not going to pretend like I fully understand.
Thank God. There's an old joke I want the world to hear. Einstein dies and goes to heaven. And St. Peter says, Einstein, you're the world's smartest man. Where can we put you where you're not going to be bored? And Einstein says, I can talk to anybody. I'm very flexible. And St. Peter says, what if we put you in a room with a geologist? And Einstein says, we can talk about measurement of rocks and the evolution of rocks because that interests me. It's very scientific. Okay, what if we put you in a room with a biologist? Oh, we can talk about regression to the mean and island dwarfism, all these wonderful mathematical concepts that are built in to the science of biology. And what if we put you in a room with a barmaid who has no scientific training? Not a problem. We can talk about the weather. Okay, Einstein, what if we put you in a room with an economist? Einstein says, we can also talk about the weather.
I, I knew where this was going, and
Ah, there it is.
I still
Thank
knew
you
I
for
was
your
going to enjoy
silence.
it.
All right. Well,
I love it.
we'll end it there. Let the voters go out and make their choice. And please, if you haven't voted, go forth and do so now.
Yes, the most important message from all of this useless chant banter is just vote, exercise your right. That is the most important thing from all this. You can disagree with everything we just said. You can agree with all it. I don't care. Go vote, please. Show your voice.
100%. Thank you so much.